Jimmy Page sits in silence, his weathered hands motionless on his lap. For 50 years he's watched, he's remembered, and he's said nothing. But at 81, the architect of Led Zeppelin has decided the silence ends now. 6 guitarists who made him want to snap his strings and walk away forever. Names that still make his jaw clench. Betrayals that cut deeper than any blade. This is Jimmy Page's hit list, and you've never heard him this raw. He doesn't forgive anyone who harms the sacred world of music. In some places, it was actually a penalty of jail time if you were caught with the revolutionary music of the 60s. For over half a century, Page stayed silent. No public criticism, no outbursts, but behind those piercing eyes, he cataloged every slight, every false note, every moment of musical betrayal. And now the reckoning has come. 6 guitarists who triggered something primal in the Led Zeppelin legend. Not jealousy, something far more dangerous, pure contempt, the kind that festers in silence until it demands to be spoken. This isn't about competition. This isn't about egos clashing backstage. This is about a man who views music as sacred scripture, watching others desecrate what he holds holy. Page has spent decades building sonic cathedrals, while others played with matches. He's witnessed legends crumble under the weight of their own mediocrity. He's watched frauds ascend to thrones they never earned. But silence has its limits. The first name on his list, Eric Clapton. And what Page reveals about God himself will shatter everything you thought you knew about guitar royalty. The gloves are off, the truth is raw. And Jimmy Page is finally ready to settle scores that have been burning for 50 years. Are you ready to witness a legend's most brutal honesty? Because once you hear what comes next, you'll never listen to these guitar gods the same way again. Jimmy Page has never had to shout that he despises Eric Clapton. Just hearing that name in an interview, his expression turns arctic, cold enough to silence entire rooms. To Page, it wasn't envy, it was something far more cutting, contempt. The kind that simmers beneath the skin like an infected wound, never healing, always burning. While the world painted Clapton as God on bathroom walls and notebook covers, Page merely smirked. His response was surgical, delivered with the precision of a blade between ribs. If that's God, then I'd rather play with my head than with an empty heart like that. To Page, Clapton wasn't a genius. He was a blues player trapped in amber. 3 pocket licks, repeated endlessly until the day he died. What the public praised as sincerity, Page saw as an excuse to mask pure laziness. Then came the betrayal that made it personal. Picture this. 1965, a cramped London studio, thick with cigarette smoke and ambition. Someone mentions Clapton's name. Page's eyes turn predatory, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow cuts through the noise. He's got 3 blues licks in his pocket and he'll ride them until the day he dies. That wasn't criticism. That was a death sentence. But the real knife twist came when Clapton quietly stole drummer Jim Gordon, the very musician Page had earmarked for his solo project. No conversation, no professional courtesy, just silent theft wrapped in polite smiles. Page's verdict was swift and merciless. Eric built his whole career off the backs of other men. He's very good at arriving late and taking credit for what was already halfway built. This wasn't personal grudge territory. This was war. Clapton's response? Deafening silence. And that silence drove Page absolutely mad, because he recognized it for what it truly was. Not noble calm, but the calculated quiet of someone who knew they had no argument left, yet still wanted to maintain the illusion of dignity. The more silent Clapton remained, the hotter Page's fury burned, because in his mind, silence was the weapon of weak men. When Led Zeppelin rose like a sonic storm, shaking an entire generation, Page plunged headfirst into complex musical architecture. Meanwhile, Clapton withdrew into sleepy ballads and heroin. One built immortal sonic cathedrals. The other wrote apologies on his guitar for his own retreat. Then came the insult disguised as casual observation. Clapton, with that trademark lazy drawl, delivered what felt like a silk-wrapped slap. I prefer things that are a bit more real. Translation: Led Zeppelin wasn't real, not authentic, soulless. Page didn't explode. He calculated. At a party in Notting Hill, someone carelessly mentioned Clapton's name. Page raised his glass, eyes fixed on the amber liquid as if the entire world had ceased to exist. His voice, when it came, was colder than winter fog. I don't play background for anyone. Each word landed like a nail driven into stone. Page stood behind no one, especially not someone like Clapton. 1983, the Arms concert. Organizers dreamed of a charity duet between two guitar legends. Clapton agreed immediately, eager for the spotlight and the redemption story. Page's response? A single word that echoed through music history: no. No explanation, no softening, no compromise. As if orchestrated by fate itself, they never shared a stage, no handshake, no reconciliation, only a void, deliberately constructed through calculated absence. When events honored Clapton, Page's seat remained empty. No congratulatory letters, no tribute videos. His absence wasn't accidental. It was a declaration carved in silence. I don't attend the funeral of something I never acknowledged as alive. The divide became tribal. Fans split into warring camps. Team Raw Pain versus Team Intellectual Architecture. But between them, Page remained untouchable, his silence cutting deeper than any scream. Until 2010. A bold French journalist finally asked the question that had haunted guitar circles for decades. After all this time, what do you think of Clapton? Spicio didn't frown, didn't scowl. He simply sipped his tea and delivered a line that was calm, cruel, and absolutely devastating. Clapton is probably the best guitarist among those who never dared to take risks. Before anyone could process the surgical precision of that insult, he twisted the knife. Me? I don't play safe. When asked if there was anything about Clapton he respected, Page shrugged with the indifference of someone discussing an outdated vinyl record. He's always stayed true to himself. No growth, no change. Sometimes that's a kind of courage, too. A compliment that tasted like poison. Everyone understood the subtext. Remaining the same forever is just another way to die standing still. This war has no end, no bloodshed, no proclamations, only distance. Every absent chair at a Clapton event, every freezing glance, every brutally honest observation disguised as casual commentary. All of it forms a quiet crack running through the foundation of guitar history. Two men, two philosophies, never in sync, never side by side, and certainly never shaking hands, because in Jimmy Page's universe, true brilliance cannot emerge from a guitar that only repeats what's comfortable, and it certainly cannot come from a God too terrified to step outside his own church. But if you think Page's war with Clapton was brutal, wait until you hear about Keith Richards. If you believe two icons like Jimmy Page and Keith Richards would naturally respect each other, prepare to have that illusion obliterated. Between them stretches a silent battlefield spanning half a century. No brawls, no tabloid scandals, just arctic stares, razor-sharp verbal cuts, and symbolic indifference that speaks louder than screaming. Page once dropped this verbal grenade. Some people play music to tell stories, while others just strum three chords and call it art. He didn't name Richards. He didn't need to. Everyone knew he was targeting the man he saw as the living embodiment of musical sloppiness wrapped in swagger. Richards fired back with equal venom. To Rolling Stone, he delivered his own surgical strike. Jimmy is a talented guitarist, but I always felt there was something hollow in their music, especially with John Bonham sounding like an out-of-control 18-wheeler. But the night that poured gasoline on their smoldering hostility? Madison Square Garden, 1975. Picture the scene, backstage tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Page extends his hand politely, a glass of scotch catching the stage lights. Richard smirks and delivers the line that would echo through rock history. I don't shake hands with a thief. The room froze. Time stopped. From that moment, Page understood his entire career had been questioned in front of rock royalty. Page responded with silence. But Richards' look burned itself into his memory like a brand. Later, Page would admit he respected Richards' innate sense of riff and timing, elements that gave his stage presence an undeniable silk and fire allure. But he made one thing crystal clear. They lived in completely different universes, not just musically, but ideologically. From that night forward, Richards took every opportunity to draw blood. In one particularly savage interview, he compared Led Zeppelin to a manufactured band that rose at precisely the right moment to fill a market void. His words cut like broken glass. Hollow, void of substance, driven only by volume and effects. Page wasn't going to take that lying down. In a scorching 1977 NME interview, he delivered his own kill shot. Anyone can bang out a few random notes on a guitar and call it satisfaction. But real music requires creativity, a leap beyond soulless repetition. When pressed about the Stones specifically, Page's dismissal was surgical. 3 chords, 1 riff, and an attitude. The implication was devastating. Richards and the Stones thrived in mediocrity, refusing to evolve, content to rot in their own limitations. Richards' counterattack was equally brutal. Zeppelin may have been a sound machine willing to turn up the volume, but they forgot what truly moves people, the old school grit in every note. Then came the line that would haunt Led Zeppelin's legacy forever. They can build rocket engines, but they forgot to write songs that make people cry. With those words, Richards dismissed every elaborate production technique, every sonic innovation, every architectural marvel Page had constructed. The two legends have never stood on the same stage. They've shared music industry events, mutual friends, backstage spaces at the same venues, but never walked side by side, never acknowledged each other's presence. When Zeppelin ended after Bonham's death, Richards offered what sounded like condolence, but felt like a final insult. I guess they needed more than a drummer to keep the music from collapsing. Casual, almost sympathetic, but sharp enough to slice through Zeppelin's entire legacy with surgical precision. Years later, when confronted about Richards, Page's response was tellingly cold. Keith might be one of the best guitarists among those who mistake noise for soul. Then, the declaration that needed no explanation, if you ask who Jimmy Page is, the short answer is Jimmy. A declaration that required no alliance. Page stood alone, needing no foundation from Richard, seeking no approval. Their feud was never loud or public, just quiet incompatibility that lasted half a century, forming its own twisted legend. Page, the perfectionist risk-taker, obsessing over everything from mic placement to overdubs. Richards, the raw soul incarnate, vintage riffmaster with a cigarette dangling from his lips, utterly indifferent to studio clocks. Two extremes of British rock, incompatible. But together, they made rock history electrify with every breath they took. But in the late 1980s, while Page was cementing Led Zeppelin as the eternal emblem of British rock, another name shot up like Lightning YNGWIE MALMSTEEN. The Swedish guitarist with dizzying technique and classical scale wizardry seized the spotlight with swagger that bordered on the surreal. But he didn't just claim to be the best, he took direct aim at Page's legacy. I don't care about blues scales, I don't want to bend one note and call it emotion. That's not guitar playing, that's just laziness. Though he didn't name names, Page and every blues devotee knew exactly who was in those crosshairs. Page never responded publicly. He didn't need to, but according to those who worked closely with him, he turned pale with rage. Not because some 20-something had insulted his music, but because that young man had just desecrated everything Page held sacred. Feel over flash, soul over speed. When asked about his influences with Jimmy Page listed among 10 guitarists he admired, Malmsteen's response was a surgical strike designed to recast Page as a relic. I respect Led Zeppelin, but as a guitarist, too sloppy for me. I prefer Paganini over Pentatonics. At Abbey Road Studios, an engineer witnessed Page's quiet fury. Page raised an eyebrow at the mention of Malmsteen's name, then muttered, "If you play 3,000 notes and none of them mean anything, what's the point?" A rhetorical question that cut to the bone. Technique without feeling equals musical emptiness. Others remembered Page's devastating assessment in, "It's like watching someone juggle chainsaws." Impressive? Maybe. Music? Not even close. Then came the moment that would become rock legend, a charity event in London. Both men present, unaware of each other's attendance. YNGWIE entered the green room like a vampire prince, velvet suit, sunglasses indoors. Page turned, exhaled quietly, and dropped this immortal line. "Oh, great. Dracula plays a Strat." Seconds later, YNGWIE turned back with a smirk that could cut diamond. At least Dracula practices. Dead silence. The room held its breath. For the first time, guitar dreamers witnessed a silent war explode into real time. Now the question remains, which name shocked you most? Do you stand with Jimmy Page's brutal honesty, or was the architect of Stairway to Heaven too harsh in his judgments? Drop your thoughts below. Tell us who you believe is the greatest guitarist of all time, and who never should have picked up a guitar in the first place. The War of the Six Strings continues, and thanks to Jimmy Page's final reckonings, we now know where the battle lines were drawn all along. Hit that like button if these revelations blew your mind. Subscribe for more untold truths from rock's most guarded legends. Because in the raw, electrifying world of rock and roll, the most brutal honesty comes from those who've seen it all and lived to tell the tale.